Hi everyone, and welcome to the second example. So we're gonna build on what we did before, where we wrote a function called roll die that returned a random roll of a six-sided die. And this time we are going to write a function that returns more than one random rolls of a six-sided die in a list. So we're gonna write a function called roll die, and then an n in parentheses, which I'll explain, that returns n random die rolls. So let's get started. Anytime we define a function, we use def. The name of our function will be roll die, but now we have something called a parameter, and that parameter we're calling n. So here's what that means. A parameter for a function simply means that there is some piece of information this function needs to know when you call it in order to do what it's supposed to do. So in this case, we want this function to roll a die a certain number of times, so n is going to represent that certain number. And then when we call the function, we have to actually tell it what number n is. So we want it to roll a die 3 times, or 10 times, or 100 times. That would be what n is, okay? So again, n is called the parameter, and so now we'll see how to write a function that uses a parameter. So let's see. We're gonna return the random die rolls. Whoops, I should have written this before. In a list. We're gonna return a whole list of die rolls. So because we know we're gonna need a list, I'm gonna create one. I'll just call it list of rolls. And for the time being, that list is going to be empty. So I just indicate that with empty square brackets. So right now I have a list that's empty and it's just waiting to be filled up with die rolls. Now I need to roll the die not just one time, but n times, whatever n is, whether it's 3 or 10 or 100. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set up a loop that executes n times. So for I in range 0 to n, that will execute n times whatever n is. I am going to roll a die by randomly generating a number between 1 and 6. What am I going to do with that number? Well, I'm not going to return it right away because I don't want to return just a single roll. Instead, I'm going to take that roll, whatever it was, and I'm going to add it to the to that list called list of rolls. So the way we do that, thinking back to lists, is we do list of rolls dot append, and then we append whatever the roll was. So let me include some space here. So what have I got so far? I've got an empty list, and then I've got a loop that executes n times. Each time, let's put in some comments, each time it rolls a die and adds the value of that roll into the list. So after that's all finished, after the loop is done executing, all that's left to do is return the list. So return list of rolls. Okay? So we'll save that, execute it. Great, and just like before, nothing happens. So we don't have any errors, but we haven't called the function yet, so we get no output. So go ahead, pause the video, type in this code, and make sure that when you run it, you get no errors. Great. So now let's go ahead and we'll actually just call the function from the code editor itself. So we'll let my rolls be the result from list of rolls. The result of roll die. Now, when we call a function that has a parameter like n, we have to pass it an actual value that it's going to use in place of n. So n represents how many times we want the die rolled. So let's say we want it rolled 10 times. So then we will print out my rolls just like before. And what we should see output is a list of 10 rolls of the die. So let's see what happens. And there we have it. These are the 10 rolls that happened. Oops. So we could easily change that n value if we wanted the die rolled 52 times. Then we can go ahead and roll it 52 times and we get a list of 52 random numbers. So a key idea here is that when you define a function that has a parameter, that means that that function is expecting some input value when you call it. So when you call it, you have to remember to pass it an actual parameter, an input value. Something students might do is forget to pass a parameter. So if we did that, and we forgot to pass a parameter there, let's see what would happen. We actually get an error, and that says roll die is missing one required positional argument. An argument is like a parameter. So it's missing the n. We said it was going to get an n, and it didn't. So that's what will happen, and that can sort of help students debug their code. So I'll go ahead, put an actual value there, and you can go ahead, pause the video, and try calling the function and printing out the output in your code. Great. Now the last thing I want to show you with this example is how you can combine user interaction and functions to create much more realistic programs. So here's what I mean. Instead of us telling roll die how many times to roll the die, let's ask a user how many times they want to roll the die and then roll it that number of times. So right now, I'm going to take the 50 out because I don't want to roll the die 50 times necessarily. I want to roll it however many times the user wants. So up here, I'm going to stick in a line of code that's going to grab some user input. So I'll say, let's say user num equals int, because they're giving me a numerical value, input, how many times would you like to roll? I'll leave a space here before the quotation mark so that they don't type in a space, and then end my parentheses. Now whatever number they type in, whether it's 5 or 500, will get stored in user num. So now here, when I call the roll die function, I want it to roll the die user num times, however many times the user wanted. So let's see if this works. Save it, run it. How many times would you like to roll? 8. And there we have it, 8 rolls of the die. So this is a really good example to show how you can use user input to generate a piece of information from the user that then gets passed as a parameter to a function that then does something. So go ahead, this is the end of this example. So you can go ahead, pause the video, and make sure that this code works for you. And I will see you in the next video.